Ma'am, turn around for me.
Are you serious?
Turn around.
Ugh, fine.
Hands behind your back.
Dad, help me! Seriously?
You made your choices.
The video went viral almost overnight. Within a week, it had accumulated nearly 4 million views, and the comments section overflowed with praise for what viewers perceived as exceptional parenting. The title promised entertainment at the expense of an entitled teenager, and millions of people clicked, watched, and walked away, believing they had witnessed a father delivering much-needed discipline to his spoiled daughter. But what if everything those viewers thought they understood about this incident was fundamentally wrong? What if the real story wasn't about a cocky teenager finally getting her comeuppance, but about a young woman whose constitutional rights were trampled while her own father helped build the case against her? This is the story that almost nobody is talking about. It's a story about viral narratives and how easily they can obscure the truth. It's about the power of authority and how quickly we accept official versions of events without questioning whether those in uniform might be the ones crossing the line. And perhaps most troublingly, it's about a moment when a father had the opportunity to protect his daughter during one of the most vulnerable experiences of her young life, and instead chose to side with her accuser. If you're someone who believes that understanding your rights matters, if you think that the truth deserves more attention than viral entertainment, then I invite you to stay with me through this entire story. What you're about to learn might completely change how you view not just this incident, but every similar video you encounter in the future. And if you find value in content that looks beyond the surface to examine what's really happening in these encounters between citizens and law enforcement, consider subscribing so you don't miss the deeper analysis that mainstream coverage so often ignores. Let me take you back to a warm afternoon in early October to a stretch of road called Settlers Path in Brevard County, Florida. The sun hung low enough in the sky to cast long shadows across the asphalt, and the air carried that particular humidity that Florida residents know intimately, the kind that makes your clothes stick to your skin and shimmers above the pavement in visible waves of heat. Deputy Marcus Thornton of the Cocoa Beach Police Department wasn't supposed to be doing anything remarkable that afternoon. He had been dispatched to investigate a hit-and-run accident outside a gated community called Palmetto Shores, a modest residential development where retirees and young families shared streets lined with palm trees and modest single-family homes. The incident itself was relatively minor, a fender bender in which the at-fault driver had fled the scene rather than exchange insurance information. Thornton was standing on the shoulder of Settlers Path Road, interviewing the victim of that hit-and-run, a middle-aged woman whose sedan now bore a crumpled rear bumper and whose frustration was evident in every word she spoke. What's important to understand about this moment is the physical layout of the scene. Deputy Thornton's marked patrol vehicle was not visible to passing traffic. It was parked approximately 300 feet away, tucked behind the gatehouse of the Palmetto Shores development, completely obscured from the view of anyone driving along Settlers Path Road. From the perspective of any motorist traveling that stretch of highway, there was no indication whatsoever that law enforcement was present. No flashing lights, no marked vehicle, no official signage. Just a man in uniform standing on the side of the road, engaged in conversation with a civilian. Now I want you to hold that image in your mind because it becomes critically important to everything that follows. Deputy Thornton was deep in conversation with the hit-and-run victim when he heard something that immediately commanded his attention. The unmistakable growl of a modified exhaust system approached from the east, growing louder with each passing second. He turned toward the sound and observed a silver Chevrolet Camaro approaching in the westbound lane, traveling at what he would later estimate to be well above the posted speed limit. The Camaro was in the process of passing another vehicle, crossing over the double yellow center line to do so. Let me pause here to acknowledge something that's important for context. Passing in a no-passing zone is a traffic violation. Speeding is a traffic violation. If the driver of that Camaro was indeed committing these infractions, they were wrong to do so. I'm not here to suggest that traffic laws don't matter or that speeding is somehow acceptable behavior, but what I am going to show you is how a minor traffic violation was transformed into a felony charge, how constitutional rights were ignored, and how the punishment being pursued against this young driver is wildly disproportionate to anything she actually did. According to Deputy Thornton's official report, which I've obtained and reviewed in detail, he immediately began walking toward the roadway upon spotting the Camaro. He claims he entered the asphalt shoulder of the westbound lane and raised his hand, palm facing the approaching vehicle, in a clear gesture signaling the driver to stop. He states that he maintained this gesture continuously as the Camaro approached, making his intentions unmistakably clear to anyone watching. But let's think about this from the driver's perspective for a moment. You're 18 years old. You're driving home on a road you've traveled countless times before. Maybe you're thinking about the homework waiting for you at home, or the clinical rotation you have scheduled for your nursing program next week, or simply what you're going to have for dinner. And suddenly, off to your right, you notice a figure on the shoulder of the road. Not a police car with flashing lights. Not a marked vehicle blocking the lane. Not even a figure standing in the road itself. Just a person on the shoulder, one hand raised, wearing what might be a uniform, or might be a security guard outfit, or might be anything at all. What would you do in that moment? Would you recognize instantly and without any doubt that this person was a law enforcement officer with the legal authority to stop you? Would you immediately understand that you were required to stop? Or would some part of you hesitate, uncertain about what exactly was happening and whether it was safe to pull over for what might just be some random person trying to flag you down for unknown reasons? The driver of that silver Camaro was a young woman named Brooke Delaney. She had turned 18 just 7 months earlier. She was enrolled in a nursing program at a local community college, working toward a career that would allow her to help others. She had no criminal record whatsoever. Not so much as a speeding ticket marred her driving history. And on this particular afternoon, she was heading to a friend's house in the Palmetto Shores subdivision, a destination she had visited dozens of times before. According to Deputy Thornton, Brooke's Camaro did not slow down as it approached his position. Instead, she maintained her speed and passed by the location where he was standing. And then, he claims, she actually accelerated after passing him, speeding away down Settlers Path Road. Now, here's where the official narrative and the reality of what happened begin to diverge in significant ways. Deputy Thornton states that after Brooke's Camaro passed his position, he immediately ran to his patrol vehicle, which again was parked approximately 300 feet away, out of sight behind the community gatehouse. He jumped into his cruiser and attempted to pursue the Camaro, but by the time he reached the road, the vehicle had vanished. There was no high-speed chase. There was no pursuit with lights and sirens. There was no continuous following of the suspect vehicle. The car was simply gone. Think about what this means. Deputy Thornton is claiming that a felony occurred, the crime of fleeing and eluding a law enforcement officer, but there was no actual chase, no pursuit. No attempt by Brooke to outrun a marked police vehicle. All that happened, according to his own account, is that she drove past a man standing on the side of the road who was gesturing for her to stop. That's it. That's the entire basis for a felony charge that could destroy this young woman's future. I want to stop here and ask you something directly. We're about 12 minutes into this story, and already we've identified some serious problems with the official version of events. Does this match what you expected when you clicked on this video? Because I know that the viral footage presents this as a clear-cut case of an entitled teenager getting what she deserved. I know the comments are full of people praising the father and mocking the daughter, but I'm curious, are you starting to see why those reactions might have been premature? Let me know in the comments what you're thinking at this point, because I genuinely want to understand how this story lands with different people. After failing to locate the Camaro on Settlers Path Road, Deputy Thornton put out what's called a BOLO, a be on the lookout alert to other units in the area. He provided a description of the vehicle and began canvassing the surrounding neighborhoods, searching for the silver Camaro that had evaded his attempt to stop it. Approximately 12 minutes later, Deputy Thornton was driving slowly through the Palmetto Shores subdivision when he spotted something that made him pull over immediately. There, parallel parked on a quiet residential street called Marigold Way, sat a silver Chevrolet Camaro. The vehicle was unoccupied. No one was inside or anywhere near it. Thornton exited his patrol vehicle and approached the Camaro cautiously, his body camera recording every moment. He walked up to the hood of the vehicle and placed his hand on the metal surface. It was warm to the touch, indicating that the engine had been running recently. Looking around the immediate area, his gaze settled on a residence at 4821 Marigold Way. The garage door of this home was open, and several people were visible inside, appearing to be engaged in casual conversation. Deputy Thornton approached the open garage and called out to the occupants. "Excuse me," he said, his voice carrying the practiced authority of someone accustomed to commanding attention. "Do any of you know who owns that silver Camaro parked on the street?" There was a brief exchange of glances among the people in the garage. A woman in her 40s stepped forward slightly and nodded. "Yeah, it belongs to a girl who just got here. She's inside." Deputy Thornton's next words were spoken as a command rather than a request. "Can you have her come out to the garage, please?" And this is the moment where everything changes. This is the moment that will determine whether this case has any legal validity at all. Because what happened next constitutes what I believe to be a clear violation of the Fourth Amendment of the United States Constitution, the constitutional protection against unreasonable searches and seizures that has been the bedrock of American liberty since the founding of this nation. The woman disappeared into the house, and a few moments later, Brooke Delaney walked into the garage from the interior of the home. She was wearing casual clothes, jeans, and a light-colored top. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. She looked like exactly what she was, an 18-year-old college student who had no idea that her life was about to be turned upside down. Deputy Thornton fixed her with a steady gaze. "Do I look familiar to you?" he asked. Brooke studied his face for a moment, her expression uncertain. "Kind of," she replied hesitantly. "Yeah." Thornton nodded. "I thought so." And then, without warning, without reading her rights, without obtaining a warrant, without establishing any of the legal prerequisites for what he was about to do, Deputy Thornton issued a command that would echo through court proceedings for months to come. "Turn around. Put your hands behind your back. You're under arrest for fleeing and eluding law enforcement." The sound of handcuffs clicking shut on Brooke Delaney's wrists marked the beginning of a legal nightmare that continues to this day. But what Deputy Thornton apparently didn't realize, or perhaps simply didn't care about, was that everything he was doing at this moment was almost certainly illegal. Let me explain why. And I want to be very clear about this because it goes to the heart of our constitutional protections. There is a landmark Supreme Court case called Crawford versus District of Columbia that established a fundamental principle of American law. Police officers cannot arrest people inside their homes without an arrest warrant. This isn't some obscure technicality or legal loophole. It is a cornerstone of Fourth Amendment jurisprudence, the legal doctrine that protects every American from having government agents burst into their private residences without proper authorization from a court. And this protection doesn't just apply to homeowners. In a 1981 Supreme Court case called Griffin versus Maryland, the court ruled that police officers may not conduct a warrantless search or arrest at a third party's home without consent or exigent circumstances. In other words, even if you're just visiting someone else's house, you are still protected by the Fourth Amendment while you're there. This was further reinforced by a 1990 case, Commonwealth versus Jacobson, which held that even overnight guests at a home have a reasonable expectation of privacy at the residence they are visiting. The Fourth Amendment's protections travel with you wherever you go within a private dwelling. Now, let's apply these principles to what Deputy Thornton did. He approached a private residence. He stood inside the garage of that residence, which is legally considered part of the home and carries full Fourth Amendment protection. He ordered a person to come out from inside the house, and then, standing inside that garage, he placed her under arrest. At no point did Deputy Thornton obtain a warrant. At no point did he receive consent from the homeowner to enter the premises for the purpose of making an arrest. At no point did anyone inside the home invite him to do what he did. He simply walked onto private property, demanded that a suspect be produced, and arrested her inside the protected space of someone's garage. The only possible defense for this warrantless arrest would be what's called the exigent circumstances exception, specifically the hot pursuit doctrine. Under this legal principle, a police officer may make a warrantless entry into private property to arrest a suspect who is actively fleeing and attempting to avoid arrest. But, and this is crucial, the arrest must be set in motion in a public place, and there must be an immediate and continuous pursuit of the suspect. Look at what actually happened here. there was no immediate and continuous pursuit. Deputy Thornton's own body camera timestamps show that approximately 12 minutes elapsed between the time Brooks' Camaro passed his location and the time he discovered it parked at the residence. 12 minutes. He didn't follow her there. He didn't chase her there. He put out a bolo and drove around the neighborhood until he happened to spot her car. There was no chase. There was no pursuit. There was a traffic violation that occurred on a public road, followed by a 12-minute gap during which the suspect went about her business entirely unaware that anyone was looking for her. When Deputy Thornton finally located her vehicle, it was parked and unoccupied. There was no attempt to flee, no attempt to hide, no indication whatsoever of any consciousness of guilt. This is not hot pursuit. This is not exigent circumstances. This is a police officer who wanted to make an arrest and decided that the constitutional requirements protecting that arrest's validity simply didn't apply to him. Everything that flows from this unconstitutional arrest, every statement Brooke made, every piece of evidence gathered, all of it should be subject to what's called the exclusionary rule. This legal doctrine holds that evidence obtained through constitutional violations cannot be used against a defendant in court. If the arrest itself was illegal, then the fruits of that arrest are poisoned. But watching the body camera footage, you would never know that Deputy Thornton had done anything wrong. His demeanor was calm, even friendly. He spoke to Brooke in the tone of someone who was simply doing his job, enforcing the law as he was sworn to do. And this veneer of professionalism is precisely what makes these situations so dangerous for citizens who don't understand their rights. Brooke's initial reaction to being arrested was confusion and disbelief. "What?" she said, her voice carrying genuine surprise. "I walked out, flagged you down, told you to stop, and you rapidly accelerated away from me," Deputy Thornton explained. "What?" Brooke repeated. The word carried a note of bewilderment that anyone watching objectively should have recognized as authentic. "Yes, ma'am," Thornton replied. "It's all on body cam." And there it was. The phrase that would be repeated over and over throughout this encounter. It's all on body cam. Deputy Thornton seemed to believe that the presence of recorded footage automatically validated everything he was doing. But here's the thing about body camera footage. It captures what happens, but it doesn't determine whether what happens is legal or right. You can record yourself violating someone's constitutional rights, and all that footage proves is that the violation occurred. From inside the garage, with handcuffs now secured around her wrists, Brooke asked if she could call her mother. The request was that of a frightened teenager reaching out for parental support during a confusing and overwhelming experience. Thornton agreed to the call, and as Brooke prepared to contact her family, he continued explaining his version of events. "I am a law enforcement officer, fully uniformed, telling you to stop because you're passing all those cars in a double yellow line," he stated, "and here's where we need to pause and examine something important." Deputy Thornton kept emphasizing that he was fully uniformed. He seemed to believe that this fact by itself established that Brooke should have recognized him as a police officer and understood his gestures as a lawful command to stop. But think about this from the perspective of a driver passing at highway speed. What does fully uniformed mean to someone in a moving vehicle who catches only a momentary glimpse of a figure on the roadside? Police uniforms vary significantly from department to department. Security guards often wear similar attire. From a car traveling at speed, distinguishing between a police officer, a security guard, a parking enforcement agent, or any other uniformed official would be virtually impossible, especially when there's no marked vehicle, no flashing lights, no sirens, nothing to contextualize that fleeting image. Brooke attempted to defend herself, explaining that she had only passed one vehicle because it was traveling extremely slowly. Deputy Thornton dismissed this explanation. "It doesn't matter," he said. "You still fled law enforcement, and then you rapidly accelerated as you went by me. You didn't stop, didn't do anything, didn't even hit the brakes." "No, I was going the speed limit across," Brooke insisted. "No, you weren't," Thornton replied flatly, his tone suggesting that the matter was not open for discussion. This exchange reveals something crucial about the power dynamic at play. Brooke was attempting to provide her version of events, but Deputy Thornton wasn't interested in hearing it. In his mind, he had already determined what had happened, and anything Brooke said to the contrary was simply evidence of her being uncooperative or dishonest. This is a common pattern in encounters between citizens and law enforcement, the assumption that the officer's perception is automatically correct, and any contradictory account from the citizen is either a lie or an excuse. When Brooke asked if she could speak to someone else, perhaps hoping for a more sympathetic ear, Thornton reminded her that he had been the only officer at the scene. When she specifically requested to speak with his supervisor, Thornton agreed that his supervisor was en route and that she was welcome to wait for him. "That's fleeing law enforcement," Thornton stated, as if the mere repetition of the charge made it true. Let's stop here and really examine what fleeing and eluding actually requires under the law. This isn't some minor distinction. It's the difference between a traffic ticket and a felony conviction that could follow Brooke for the rest of her life. Under Florida statute and similar laws exist in most states, fleeing and eluding is defined as willfully failing to stop a vehicle after being directed to stop by a law enforcement officer who has clearly and visibly identified themselves. Most interpretations of this statute require the law enforcement officer to be in a marked vehicle with lights and sirens activated, or at minimum to have made their identity as a police officer absolutely clear to the driver. Standing on the side of the road waving your hand does not constitute the kind of clear identification that the statute contemplates. There was no marked police vehicle visible. There were no flashing lights. There was no siren. There was no indication, other than a uniform that could have been anything, that the person gesturing was a law enforcement officer with the authority to stop traffic. Moreover, the very concept of eluding implies an attempt to escape from pursuing law enforcement. But there was no pursuit here. Brooke didn't try to outrun a police car. She didn't engage in evasive maneuvers. She didn't speed through residential neighborhoods trying to escape. She simply continued driving to her destination, parked her car on the street, and went inside a house. Those are not the actions of someone consciously fleeing law enforcement. Those are the actions of someone who had no idea they were being stopped. But Deputy Thornton had committed to his narrative. In his mind, a felony had been committed, and Brooke Delaney was going to answer for it. The call to Brooke's parents would prove to be one of the most consequential moments of this entire ordeal. What should have been an opportunity for a parent to advocate for their child instead became something far more troubling. I need to tell you about what happened during that phone call, and I want you to pay close attention because it's a masterclass in how authority figures can manipulate well-meaning parents into working against their own children's interests. When Deputy Thornton got on the phone with Brooke's father, a man named Gerald Delaney, he presented his version of events with practiced efficiency. He explained that he had been standing in the middle of the road, fully uniformed, clearly gesturing for Brooke to stop, and that she had not only refused to brake, but had actually accelerated away from him to the point where he had to run and jump into his patrol car, which was parked several hundred feet away. "I have a witness who was the victim of my hit-and-run crash who watched the entire thing," Thornton added, lending his account an air of corroboration. "So, of course that meets statute requirements for fleeing and eluding." Notice the certainty in his voice. Of course that meets statute requirements, as if there could be no question, no reasonable alternative interpretation, no possibility that he might be wrong. This confidence is precisely what makes interactions with law enforcement so dangerous for citizens who don't know their rights. The officer's certainty creates a reality that becomes very difficult to challenge. Gerald Delaney asked a reasonable question. "How far does she go from when you try to gesture her to stop?" "Over a mile," Thornton replied. "So, she didn't try to pull off the road down the street. Nothing like that." Another question. Was she able to see you?" "Oh yeah, I am in a uniform. She just told me she saw me in my uniform, so that's all I need. And I know she saw me because I was about in the middle of the road before she would run me over." This is a crucial moment in the narrative that Deputy Thornton is constructing. He's claiming that Brooke admitted to seeing him in his uniform, but let's look at what she actually said. When Thornton first approached her in the garage and asked if he looked familiar, Brooke's response was, "Kind of." That's a far cry from an admission that she clearly saw and recognized a police officer giving her a lawful command to stop. Kind of could mean anything. It could mean she vaguely remembered passing someone on the road. It could mean his face looked somewhat familiar for reasons she couldn't place. It is absolutely not the same as saying, "Yes, I saw you were a police officer ordering me to stop, and I deliberately ignored you." But Thornton was packaging her ambiguous statement as a clear admission of guilt, and Gerald Delaney apparently accepted this characterization without question. So, Thornton continued, I have everything I need for fleeing and eluding. It is what it is, so she can take it to court. It's going to go to court no matter what, but that's what I have. It meets statute requirements. And here's where Gerald Delaney's response becomes deeply troubling. Rather than advocating for his daughter, rather than asking probing questions about the circumstances, rather than expressing any skepticism about whether this situation really warranted a felony charge, he simply accepted the officer's version of events and began to lecture his daughter. So, you'll probably be in jail for the weekend then, Gerald said. His tone wasn't sympathetic or protective. It was cold, almost satisfied. Yeah, good, he added, when Thornton confirmed that Brooke wouldn't be released immediately. Good. Her own father thought it was good that his 18-year-old daughter would spend a weekend in jail. When the phone was handed back to Brooke, who was still in handcuffs standing in someone else's garage, her father's first words weren't words of comfort or support. They were accusations and criticisms. Why were you going that fast down? He demanded. Brooke tried to explain. I passed one car because he was going like 30, and I passed him. So, why didn't you pull over at the time when he waved you down to stop? Why didn't you stop? This question, which seemed so reasonable on its surface, ignored everything about the circumstances that might have made stopping uncertain or unclear. Brooke attempted to explain her perspective. Because it wasn't like he was... I really didn't even know. I just saw a person in white and black. And then doing this, she gestured with her hand. He had one hand out, and it wasn't like he was in front of my car like that. He literally was from the side. Like completely the side. This explanation is entirely consistent with the actions of someone who genuinely didn't understand that a law enforcement officer was attempting to stop her. She saw a person on the side of the road making a gesture, not blocking her path, not clearly positioned in front of her vehicle, not accompanied by any of the usual indicators of a police stop, just a figure off to the side, one hand raised, whom she caught only a glimpse of as she passed. I wasn't going 60, Brooke added, challenging Deputy Thornton's claimed estimate of her speed. That's hearsay. I was not going 60 from 30 to 60. I can't just do that when I'm in the other lane going over to the other side. She was making a valid point. The physics of acceleration don't support the narrative that she went from 30 miles per hour to 60 in the span of passing a single vehicle, but Deputy Thornton interjected, unwilling to let her challenge his account. It's all on body cam, sir, he said, addressing Gerald Delaney. I was almost in the roadway. The reason I didn't go all the way in the roadway is because she was going so fast. I didn't want to get hit by her because obviously I could see that she was not slowing down. Think about what he just admitted. He didn't go all the way into the roadway. He was on the shoulder, making gestures toward a vehicle that was traveling at highway speed. From Brooke's perspective, there was a person on the side of the road waving at her, not a police officer in the road blocking her path, not an authority figure whose commands she was obviously required to obey, just someone off to the side gesturing. But Gerald Delaney apparently wasn't interested in considering his daughter's perspective. His next comment revealed just how fully he had sided with the officer against his own child. Okay, I'm actually an instructor for speed measurement, he said, apparently establishing his credentials as someone qualified to assess driving behavior. So smart, he added sarcastically, responding to something Brooke had said. I'm not laughing. I wouldn't be laughing. It's a felony. You committed a felony. Don't laugh at that. There's something particularly devastating about hearing a parent tell their child, you committed a felony, as if it were an established fact rather than an accusation that deserved scrutiny and defense. Gerald Delaney had apparently decided that his daughter was guilty based solely on the word of the officer who had arrested her. He wasn't asking questions about constitutional rights. He wasn't wondering whether the arrest itself was legal. He wasn't considering whether his daughter might have a reasonable defense. He was simply accepting the officer's narrative and reinforcing it. I mean, you're being cocky, Gerald continued. You're not even being polite. You're not even using manners. Yeah, this has been her the entire time, sir, Deputy Thornton added, seizing the opportunity to characterize Brooke's attempts to defend herself as attitude problems. I know. That's what I don't get with her, Gerald said, his frustration evident. It's just total ridiculous. So you don't understand what you just did. "I do," Brooke replied. "Oh, you do? Do you really? Like, how do you understand what you're doing? Because you're being a smartass the whole time to me, too. So, I can only imagine how you're speaking to an officer. This is where I need to stop and talk directly to you, because I think this moment captures something profoundly important about the dynamics at play in this situation. Brooke Delaney was an 18-year-old girl standing in handcuffs in someone's garage, facing a felony charge that could destroy her future, listening to her father berate her for having an attitude. She was trying to tell her side of the story, trying to explain what she had experienced, and both the officer who arrested her and the father who should have been protecting her were dismissing everything she said as cockiness or disrespect. What were her options in that moment? Should she have simply agreed with everything Deputy Thornton said? Should she have accepted the felony charge without protest? Should she have apologized for something she may not have even understood she was doing? Is that what we expect from our citizens when they interact with law enforcement? Total submission regardless of whether their rights are being violated. There's a concept in criminal justice called the demeanor discount, the unspoken expectation that suspects who are polite and deferential to police officers will receive more lenient treatment than those who assert their rights or attempt to defend themselves. This discount is deeply problematic because it essentially punishes people for doing exactly what the law allows them to do, exercising their constitutional rights and challenging accusations they believe are unfair. Brooke's father wasn't just failing to protect her. He was actively helping to build the case against her by characterizing her legitimate attempts at self-defense as evidence of a bad attitude, and Deputy Thornton was more than happy to accept this assistance. "It's all in body cam. I've been trying to be respectful to her, but," Thornton said, trailing off in a way that suggested his patience had been tested by Brooke's refusal to simply accept her fate. "Right. I don't get it," Gerald agreed. "Like, so you just totally screwed yourself inside and out for what you just did big time, because now your car's got to get towed to the impound. You have to pay to get that out too. Now, there's going to be a 30-day hold on it." The punishments were stacking up, each one delivered with a sense of satisfaction. The arrest, the impound, the 30-day hold. And then Gerald moved on to something even more devastating. "So, your nursing stuff is going to be screwed up now too, because you don't have no damn manners." Nursing stuff. Brooke was studying to become a nurse, a career path that typically requires background checks, licensing approval, and clean records. A felony conviction could destroy that dream entirely, and her father was pointing this out not as a reason to fight the charges, but as evidence that Brooke's attitude had finally caught up with her. "And you know what?" Gerald continued. "It's going to take something like this to wake you up now, and now you're done because you're so goddamn arrogant and cocky the whole damn time when you couldn't talk to the officer normally. When you did it, you had to be a real jerk, didn't you? I know you can't. He's got the body cam on. So, you just totally screwed your whole future up. Nursing degree, everything. You just did it because you're being invincible. But guess what? You're going to spend the weekend in jail, and you'll see how invincible you are. You know what? It might teach you a lesson now. Maybe you just don't listen." This is the part of the video that went viral. This is the part that millions of viewers watched and applauded. This is the part that inspired comments like, "Finally, a parent," and "This is why fathers are needed," and "Her dad is the greatest of all time." But I want you to consider what actually happened here. An 18-year-old girl committed what was, at most, a minor traffic violation. She was spotted by an officer who was standing on the side of the road without a marked vehicle visible, and she didn't stop for his hand gestures. That officer then tracked her down, entered private property without a warrant, arrested her inside someone's home, and charged her with a felony. Throughout this process, she tried to explain her perspective, tried to provide context for why she might not have understood she was being stopped, and both the officer and her own father dismissed everything she said as attitude. And millions of people watched this and thought the father was the hero of the story. I have to ask you something directly. Having heard the full context, having understood the constitutional issues at play, having considered what this situation looked like from Brooke's perspective, do you still think her father's response was appropriate? Do you think praising him as a model parent was the right reaction? Or do you think maybe, just maybe, the viral narrative got this one completely wrong? Leave your thoughts in the comments because I genuinely want to understand how people are processing this information. And if you're finding this kind of deeper analysis valuable, please consider subscribing so we can continue examining these situations beyond the surface level that viral clips so often present. Deputy Thornton wrapped up the call with Gerald Delaney by confirming the logistics. Brooke was being searched by a female deputy. She would be transported to the county jail for processing. She would have one phone call when she arrived. So, when you call your mom and start complaining, she's going to make you sit, Gerald told his daughter. You call me, I'll make you sit too because I'm not putting up with this. You know, you got an attitude. It's gotta change. It's gotta change. It's ridiculous that this might be your game changer. You know, you could have been a polite officer from the get-go, and you probably wouldn't be in the situation you are right now. And I bet if you ask the officer, your cockiness is probably what put you in that position right there. I guarantee it. Polite to the officer from the get-go. There it was, stated explicitly. In Gerald Delaney's mind, the appropriate response to being accused of a felony you didn't commit was to be polite and deferential. Don't argue, don't explain, don't try to defend yourself. Just accept whatever the officer says, and maybe, if you're lucky, they'll show mercy. This attitude, this expectation that citizens must submit completely to law enforcement regardless of whether their rights are being violated, is precisely what allows constitutional abuses to continue unchecked. When parents teach their children that the appropriate response to police is unquestioning compliance, when communities reinforce the message that challenging authority is always wrong, when viral videos celebrate parents who help officers build cases against their own children, we create an environment where police misconduct flourishes. I want to be clear about something. I am not anti-police. I believe in the rule of law. I believe that legitimate law enforcement serves an essential function in our society. But I also believe that the Constitution exists for a reason, that Fourth Amendment protections matter, and that an arrest is not automatically legitimate simply because it was conducted by someone wearing a badge. After the phone call ended, Brooke was loaded into a patrol vehicle for transport to the Brevard County Jail. Her silver Camaro was towed to an impound lot where it would remain for 30 days. Her personal belongings, including her laptop with all her nursing school coursework, remained in the vehicle. Her immediate future was now a weekend spent in a county jail, waiting for her first court appearance. And all of this was caught on body camera footage that would soon be posted online and viewed by millions of people who would never question whether any of it was legal. Let me walk you through what happened next, because the legal aftermath of this incident is just as troubling as the arrest itself. Brooke Delaney was formally charged with one count of felony fleeing or attempting to elude a police officer under Florida statute. This is not a minor charge. In Florida, fleeing and eluding is a third-degree felony punishable by up to 5 years in prison. A conviction would give Brooke a permanent criminal record that would follow her for the rest of her life. It would likely end her nursing career before it even began. It would affect her ability to find housing, secure employment, and move forward with her life in countless ways that most people never consider until they're facing the reality of a felony conviction. And all of this over a traffic stop that never actually happened. Remember, there was no pursuit. There was no chase. Deputy Thornton's own report confirms that approximately 12 minutes elapsed between the alleged offense and the discovery of Brooke's vehicle. He didn't follow her. He didn't chase her. He put out a bolo and searched the neighborhood until he found her car. Whatever fleeing and eluding is supposed to mean, this wasn't it. But the Brevard County State Attorney's Office apparently decided to pursue the charges anyway. As of my research into this case, the prosecution was still ongoing. Brooke Delaney, an 18-year-old with no criminal history, was still facing the possibility of a felony conviction for driving past a man standing on the side of a road. Now, I want to talk about what should happen when this case goes to trial, because there are several significant legal issues that any competent defense attorney should raise. First and most importantly, there's the matter of the warrantless arrest inside a private residence. As I explained earlier, the Fourth Amendment provides strong protections against government intrusion into homes. Deputy Thornton did not have a warrant. He did not have consent from the homeowner to enter for the purpose of making an arrest. He did not have exigent circumstances that would justify bypassing the warrant requirement. The hot pursuit doctrine does not apply because there was no immediate and continuous pursuit. This means the arrest itself was almost certainly unconstitutional. And when an arrest violates the Constitution, all evidence obtained as a result of that arrest is subject to suppression under the exclusionary rule. This could include Brooks' statements about seeing a person in uniform, which Deputy Thornton characterized as an admission of guilt. Without those statements, the prosecution's case becomes significantly weaker. Second, there's the matter of the Miranda warning. Under the Fifth Amendment, when a suspect is in custody and being interrogated, they must be informed of their right to remain silent and their right to have an attorney present before any questioning. I reviewed the body camera footage carefully, and I did not hear Deputy Thornton advise Brooke of her Miranda rights before questioning her. If those rights were not properly administered, any incriminating statements she made could be inadmissible. Third, there's the fundamental question of whether the elements of the crime were actually met. Fleeing and eluding requires willful failure to stop for a law enforcement officer who has clearly identified themselves. Was Deputy Thornton clearly identifiable as a law enforcement officer from the perspective of a driver traveling at highway speed? Was his hand gesture sufficient to constitute a lawful command to stop? Was Brooks' failure to stop willful, meaning intentional and knowing, or was it the result of confusion about what was happening? These are questions that deserve serious consideration, but in the viral video, in the comments section, in the public narrative that has surrounded this case, none of these questions were asked. Instead, the story was reduced to a simple morality tale. Entitled teenager learns a lesson from her wise father. The reality is far more complex and far more troubling. I've thought a lot about why this video resonated with so many people. Why did millions of viewers watch a young woman being arrested and berated by her father and conclude that this was a positive, heartwarming story about parental accountability? Part of it, I think, is our cultural appetite for seeing entitled people get their comeuppance. There's a satisfying narrative arc to watching someone who seems spoiled or arrogant finally face consequences. The video was titled to prime viewers for exactly this reaction. Cocky teen driver gets chewed out by dad after fleeing police. Before anyone even pressed play, they were primed to see Brooke as the villain of the story. Part of it is also our tendency to trust authority figures, especially when they speak with confidence. Deputy Thornton never wavered in his assertion that Brooke had committed a felony. He stated it as fact, over and over. For viewers who aren't familiar with Fourth Amendment law or the specific requirements of fleeing and eluding statutes, his certainty was persuasive. If the officer says it's a felony, it must be a felony, right? And part of it is the particular dynamic of the father-daughter relationship. There's something that appeals to traditional values in the image of a stern father refusing to bail out his wayward daughter, insisting that she face consequences for her actions. Comments about why fathers are needed, and finally, a parent who holds their child accountable, tap into broader cultural anxieties about permissive parenting and entitled youth. But all of these reactions depend on accepting the premise that Brooke actually did something seriously wrong. They depend on not questioning whether the arrest was legal, whether the charges were appropriate, whether her constitutional rights were violated. They depend on viewing this situation entirely through the lens that Deputy Thornton and Gerald Delaney established, a lens in which Brooks' attempts to defend herself became evidence of her bad attitude, and her protests became proof of her guilt. I want to suggest a different lens. What if this is actually a story about how easy it is for law enforcement to overreach and how willing we are as a society to accept that overreach as long as it's directed at people we've been primed to dislike? What if this is a story about how constitutional rights, the protections that are supposed to distinguish a free society from a police state, can be trampled while millions of people watch and cheer? What if this is a story about how the power dynamic between citizens and police has become so skewed that even parents, the people who are supposed to protect their children above all else, have internalized the message that submission is the only appropriate response to authority? These are the questions I think we should be asking. These are the conversations I think we should be having. And if you're finding yourself reconsidering your initial reaction to this story, If you're realizing that the viral narrative might have led you astray, I hope you'll share this video with others who might benefit from hearing the full context. As I wrap up this analysis, I want to leave you with a few final thoughts. First, about the legal situation. Brooke Delaney's case was still pending as of my last update. I sincerely hope that when a prosecutor takes a serious look at this situation, they'll recognize that pursuing a felony conviction is wildly disproportionate to anything that actually happened. I hope they'll consider the constitutional violations involved in the arrest. I hope they'll weigh the lack of evidence for willful evasion against the catastrophic consequences that a felony conviction would have on this young woman's future. But hope isn't a strategy, and Florida has a reputation for aggressive prosecution that doesn't always align with common sense justice. Second, about Gerald Delaney. I don't know this man personally. I don't know what his relationship with his daughter is like beyond this brief window into their interaction. Maybe he's a loving father who made a terrible mistake in the heat of the moment. Maybe he's since reconsidered his response and apologized to his daughter. I sincerely hope that's the case. But in this moment, captured on body camera and broadcast to millions of viewers, he failed his daughter when she needed him most. Instead of asking probing questions about the circumstances, he accepted the officer's narrative without skepticism. Instead of advocating for his child, he helped build the case against her. Instead of providing support during a frightening and confusing experience, he told her that spending a weekend in jail was good and that he would let her sit there if she called him for help. Whatever his intentions, whatever his usual relationship with his daughter, in this moment, he betrayed the fundamental responsibility of a parent to protect their child. Third, about the viral nature of this footage. I think there's a lesson here for all of us about how we consume and react to content online. The video was presented with a clear narrative frame, entitled "Teenager Gets What She Deserves." Millions of people accepted that frame without question, commenting their approval and sharing the video to amplify its message. But the frame was misleading. The full story was far more complex, and a young woman's reputation was damaged, perhaps permanently, by a viral moment that presented only one side of what happened. We should all be more skeptical of viral narratives. We should all ask more questions before accepting the framing we're given. We should all consider that the person being mocked or humiliated in online videos might have a perspective that we're not hearing. Finally, about constitutional rights. The Fourth Amendment exists for a reason. It protects all of us from government overreach into our homes and our persons. It requires that police obtain warrants before making arrests in private residences. It ensures that we cannot be seized without proper legal authority. These protections matter. They matter even when, especially when, they're being violated against people we don't like or people we've been told deserve what they're getting. Because the moment we start accepting constitutional violations against people we dislike, we've set a precedent that can be used against anyone. Deputy Marcus Thornton may have believed he was doing his job that afternoon outside Palmetto Shores, but the Constitution is supposed to constrain how officers do their jobs, and the evidence strongly suggests that Thornton crossed those constitutional lines when he entered a private garage and arrested an 18-year-old girl without a warrant. If Brooke Delaney's case teaches us anything, it should teach us to look more carefully at these situations, to question official narratives, and to remember that rights don't disappear just because someone in uniform says they do. Our constitutional protections don't end where convenience begins. Our rights don't vanish just because enforcing them might be inconvenient for law enforcement. And the truth of a situation can't be determined by view counts or comment sections. I'll continue to follow Brooke Delaney's case as it moves through the courts. If you want to stay updated on what happens, make sure you're subscribed and have notifications turned on. I'll bring you any significant developments as they occur. Until then, remember that every viral video has more to the story than what you're shown in the first viewing. Remember that constitutional rights exist precisely to protect people in moments when the power of the state is arrayed against them. And remember that sometimes the person who looks like the villain in a viral clip is actually the victim of forces far more powerful than they are. What happened to Brooke Delaney could happen to anyone. It could happen to you. It could happen to your child. And when that moment comes, you'll want someone to look beyond the viral narrative and see the full picture. That's what I've tried to do here today. I hope it's made a difference in how you understand this case and cases like it. Thank you for staying with me through this entire story. If this kind of in-depth analysis is valuable to you, please let me know in the comments. Share this video with anyone who saw the original viral clip and accepted its narrative without question. And subscribe if you want to continue exploring these situations with the depth and context they deserve. Our rights matter, the truth matters, and sometimes the real story is the opposite of what the viral version wants you to believe.